Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. If you've ever had that inspiration to write a book, doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction, we're going to help that dream become a reality. And this gentleman has helped many people do just that, publish it, and even from the start of coming up with the concept, the editing, the cover, the marketing, all of it right there. NFB Publishing in upstate New York, and he's back with us. Mark Pogodzinski joins us on the program. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Really well. And who is joining us here today? Who's joining the party?
So we have Kathy Caton, who wrote a nonfiction book. Very, I thought, fascinating idea of mining one's own family for some material and then investigating several generations past. And I think it turned out to be a fascinating book where you understand through the writing that she's learning about the subject matter as she's writing about it. And that's who we have with us today.
Very cool. Kathy, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
So the title of your book is a long one. Can you give it to us?
Sure. It's The Redemption of Uncle Richard. I have to put that in there, right? Boss Croker, the Lion of Manhattan, Irish immigrant to Tammany boss.
And he to you would be what?
He's my great-great-grand uncle on my father's side.
Wow. What inspired you to start researching him and then eventually write this book?
Well, the short story is during the pandemic, I've always been interested in my family heritage. And Dad never really went into detail about his family, as many of our parents, similar. So during the pandemic, I was furloughed from my position as a music teacher up in North Adams. And I needed something to do. And I started to research a little bit more on the family. I was told that I'm a DAR Connect, Daughters of the American Revolution. As I was coming down my father's line, there was Richard. And all I did was Google him, and everything was popping. And I started compiling the information. And then a friend of mine had said, "What are you going to do with this? This is a lot. You should write a book." Wow. So I wrote a book, and I had some help with some historians in New York City that helped to guide me along the way. And then I took a DNA test and met up with some family members that are also related to Richard Croker that helped me in the UK and helped me in Texas to kind of piece things together. And that's the short story.
So he had a very visible, interesting political career, right?
Yes, he did.
Tell us about that part.
Well, being a political junkie myself and a Democrat, it was eye-opening to me for two reasons. Number one, to find how important he was to the Tammany machine. And number two, a lot of redeeming qualities in a gentleman that was literally a political corruptionist. Yet a lot of redeeming qualities in the man himself and his backstory. That's why I call it the redemption of Uncle Richard, because many times, many articles I read were to the negative and how he took advantage of people and this, that, and the other thing. And I found through my research an endearing man that had a lot of good qualities, despite that road to political honest graft. Let's just put it that way.
So for those that don't know, Tammany boss, how would you explain that to somebody?
Okay, Tammany Hall originated in the 1700s here in this country, originally named for a Native American, Tamane, and he was one for liberty and freedom. And it was an organization that was developed on the East Coast, but of course, obviously in the United States, that would help immigrants come over, when they were emigrating to this country, pre and post Civil War, help them along, help them off the boat, give them some food to eat, a place to stay, a job. Just vote for us.
Wow. About what year did he come to the United States from Ireland?
He was 2 or 3 years old. So I want to say he was born in 1843. So 1845, 1846, he came over with his family.
Wow. The end of the 1800s, my grandmother came from Ireland right on the boat. Same kind of situation. Wow. As you were researching and writing this book, it seems like there was a lot of revelations along the way for you.
Every time, every moment in time, every day there was another page turn. From the beginning to all the investigations, to his reign, to his involvement with New York City and the greater New York. And I love history. And to know that I had a family member directly associated with this, and then trying to wrap my head around that whole concept of ancestry and where we come from and how we, then find our path as the generations come down the line. So it was quite enlightening.
Isn't it cool once you start looking into that? And we all have history. Everybody's got a story. But once you start looking at them, it's like, whoa, that's interesting. When I was younger, I was told that my grandfather, who was part of the police department in Nassau County, New York, was, if you look at the Lindbergh, when Lindbergh was just taking off, Spirit of St. Louis, Roosevelt Field in Nassau County, there's a guy holding a newspaper underneath his arm before Lindbergh took off. That was my grandfather. And how would you know it's him? Because he had this, he was like chief of police in Garden City. That's where it was. People knew him. Oh, yeah, he's the guy with he always had a newspaper underneath his arm. He always walked around with that. And then if you look at those historic pictures, that's him.
That's right.
Everybody's got a story. Once you start peeling back the layers, and it doesn't have to be something huge. It's just even knowing that your lineage, it traveled on a boat from another country, took a chance like that in itself is heroic. I can't even imagine nowadays people doing that.
And I wouldn't be surprised that there was a crossover because, he lived in New York, but the family started to move out to Long Island. Okay. Which is the, the children and the aunts and the uncles. Hewlett was a big place. Garden City was a big place where they lived. Variety of family members. So it wouldn't surprise me that your ancestry had some ties to Richard Croker and his family because there's so much there.
Yeah. And my family was, part Irish. So Mark,
That's right.
When you got this book from Kathy, what was your first thought, or what did you get? Let's go right there. We never peel those layers back, but what did she initially present you with?
She had quite a refined manuscript. So there was all the information was there with the images. It just needed to be put together in terms of making it into a book and making it flow in terms of the chapters. But she had done all the legwork. And again, I thought it was a fascinating tale, that creative nonfiction piece where as you read the book, it goes from a subject to a person. And I think that's what makes a good nonfiction book. And when I read manuscript, I thought of an author like David Gran, who does nonfiction. He did Killers of the Flower Moon. His most recent was The Wager, where he takes these historical, not incredibly well-known people, but people who are on the fringes of historical events, who impacted them in minor ways, and they become the center of a story. And I thought Kathy did a fantastic job with that. Plus, there was the added incentive that she had a personal interest in it. It was mining your own life and finding these people from your past, as she said, my grandfather was the same way. They don't talk about their great uncles or their ancestors. And then when you find out, there are so many fascinating stories that these people, like you said, like your relative was there when was it the Lindbergh?
Lindbergh took off, yeah.
Yeah, and you're like, well, why wouldn't I know that? That is a fascinating tale, and they just like, oh, yeah, that happened, and it's like blown off and glossed over. So I thought that's what the book really spoke to me, that creative nonfiction and taking again a subject matter and turning it into a person.
Well, I'm intrigued here because many of us have those stories from our families, but we may think, I never even thought of including something in a book. But so much of our lives, our families' lives, there's a story there, and it can be book worthy once you start tracing it back. I don't know a lot about my father's side of the family. My parents got divorced when I was very young, but I'll make this really short. But to illustrate these points, I have affinity for the 1850s. I don't know what it is. Like, I look at the clothing and I'm like, how do they do that? They didn't have machines. And right around that time, photography was, just blossoming, and you could actually see, not just diagrams. And I met a genealogist, and no information. I had nothing for her, except I recently found out from a DNA test that I'm Lithuanian. Who knew? I had no idea. With no info, she traced it in, wasn't even working hard. She just was able to figure it out that my father's father's father came from Lithuania and was a tailor and used to make clothes and worked his butt off and was able to make enough money to bring his family to New York City, where he started a blossoming, very big business in terms of clothes tailoring. And she even knew what street he was on with no information. It's like amazing what can be found nowadays. It's like crazy. If you believe in past lives, I think I was there at that time because I just love, watching the clothes there. Was this hard for you to research, Kathy?
That I had the time, I had the interest, I had the passion. And once I started digging, like I said, I knew I was a daughter of the American Revolution. So that was my focus. And I did find my General John Meade of the George Washington's Army. I found him, ironically, in Connecticut, where I ended up. And he is a direct descendant of mine and Richard Croker's, right? But on the other side, Richard married an American. And so, and my grandmother, she married an American. So that it's still on my father's line. So there's an emigration of Ireland. And then on the other side, went right down to pre-1776. I mean, amazing. And There's a bucket load of information about General John Meade. Folks have said to me, write another book. I'm like, well, having said that, the difficult part, the tricky part was putting the pieces together. I had loved the book Mozart in Vienna, and I loved the way that they would explain Mozart. I'm a musician by trade, and loved the way they would explain what was happening in Mozart's life at the same time what was happening in the world at the time. And then the second chapter would be as he got older, but what was going on in Salzburg at that time? You know what I mean? And so I like that reflection of tell the story, reflect back. Tell the story, reflect on what's going on in the country at the time or in New York at the time, or make a personal reflection. So I liked that concept. So it was just putting all the pieces together, which was tricky.
Unrelated question, but I'm curious, based on some things you said. As you get older, do you find you have a fascination in studying people who are, call them famous or just noteworthy, how their lives went, just everything? Are you intrigued with that?
To some level, especially with Richard Croker. I mean, he lived such a high lifestyle, 4 or 5 homes that he owned, one in Florida, in New York, in the same building that Michael Jackson lived in. You know,
Wow.
I mean, it blew my mind. And of course, you know, you can bring it back to the present. One of his horses won the Derby, over the English Derby. So he owned a home in England. He owned a home in Ireland. And that's when I was talking to a historian that had read the rough copy of the book before I sent it to Mark for final publication. He had said, number one, you're Richard Croker's niece? Because he's a historian. This is what they do. Yeah, I am.
Wow.
You know, so in that lane, I felt that sense of I'm somebody special in this man's eyes, right? Because he studied him. They have a whole plethora of information in New York about Richard Croker and the Tammany machine, right? So when he had said that to me, I said, it kind of took me aback. But yeah, it kind of, as we get older, we're enamored with, you know, the haves and the have-nots. And in Richard Croker's case, it was have not to have not to have.
Wow. All right.
So
that alone is to me reason to read the book.
Yes.
You know, how it was kind of like this.
Yes.
Mark, was it unusual for you to get a pretty substantial manuscript from an author like Kathy provided to you?
It depends on the book. Obviously, with the nonfiction, she had done the research, and then she had the story well set. Fiction, sometimes it takes a little bit more work because you can tell that the manuscript is not complete, that there's pieces missing. It's missing an act here. It's missing some conflict or some tension. With the nonfiction pieces, you basically have the story set, and it's just the way of telling it. Does it come across as personal? Does it come across as readable? Will someone sit down and enjoy the book? And I think that comes through. And as you said, the passion for it, like you could tell when you read the book, like this person cares about this subject matter. It's an added aspect that they're related, but if you didn't know that, it still wouldn't impact your reading of the book because the passion's still there. In the title, you see the word uncle, so you know that there's a relation. But again, if you dismiss that, the book reads. It reads as a great story about an interesting character. And the post-Civil War era I find fascinating. The rise of the Tammany Hall, different political aspects in that time, Reconstruction. It's an interesting time, and I think it's underserved in terms of subject matter.
Now, Kathy, if you were able to remove yourself from the relationship, you know, this is part of your family.
Sure.
Would you still find it fascinating?
I think so, because again, earlier I mentioned that I'm a political junkie.
Yeah.
And so I follow politics. I have followed politics, I think, since Obama. And I mean, rightfully so. It was a strength of my mom's. She always wanted to make sure that she was on top of everything. I think the eye-opening piece for me on either side of the aisle is the corruption piece. And for me, with the book, it actually helped, regardless of whether or not Richard is my uncle or not. It taught me where it all stemmed from. Where did this system start? How did they go from, you know, illegitimate votes to legitimate votes? It all happened during this Reconstruction period, as Mark had mentioned. And I've talked to some folks that said to me, how come they're not teaching this in the high school and they're not teaching this? And because Tammany's kind of skipped over. It's just a little blurb in a paragraph in a social studies class in high school. And yet if we're taking civics or we're taking political science, it's a major part of the subject because it lays the groundwork for both positive and negative behavior in the political lane.
Especially even in the Northeast,
Yes.
based out of New York, you think that the microscope would be a little, on that a little bit more in terms
Right.
of, teaching.
Right.
What was next for you, Mark, when you got the book, the manuscript? What needed to be done, editing, and all of that?
Again, just putting it together so it flowed, making sure that the images were a high enough resolution. And again, not doing anything where someone is going to be off-put by reading it. You want to make sure that everything is designed in a way that it's legible, readable, and approachable. So that's where we come in. The story itself was great. The subject matter, and like again, Tammany, New York City, but it filtered all the way here to Buffalo. So I had some connection to it as well. And I think anyone who reads the book will see some aspect of themselves in it. So again, it was enhancing what she did without diminishing anything at all.
Kathy, at what point did you find out that Richard was your uncle?
At what point? It was quite by happenstance. Again, I was just sitting on my computer on ancestry.com trying to find that lineage. And it was the name that popped up, the Croker name. And I just put it into Google. And
so this wasn't a common, mom passed it down. Yeah, your uncle was Richard, the boss. And
this is a surprise.
Whoa, that's even cooler.
Big surprise for my brother, for my cousin, right? For everyone, it was a big surprise.
My gosh. Wow. And was that just a few years ago?
When was the pandemic?
Yeah, well, 2020, 21.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Interesting.
Right.
Which, a couple of years ago is where I went on ancestry.com and discovered I have a half sister. Never even knew. I met her this time. It was this week, actually, last year. She lives in Atlanta. She came up to New York. We met. It's like, and just because of ancestry.com, I found I was Lithuanian. Would have never guessed. I thought I was mostly Irish and German and whatever. It's pretty amazing what you find out. That takes this whole story to a new level, because
It certainly does.
This was a discovery that you made, and then you felt compelled to tell the story of this political figure that was very impactful that others don't really know about. Wow.
Right. And taking the DNA test, which was another piece of it, I met family through that had already done research on the family. And they're related to the Crokers and another one of his siblings.
Wow.
So we're like long lost cousins, and they were sending me information about stories that they pulled on newspapers.com and variety of things that they found. And then there's a gentleman in the UK who gave me everything about Henry Croker, who was the grandfather of Richard, who was aristocracy over in Ireland. And he's an Irish bloke. And he, because of this DNA connection, we are related. And so he had all of this information for me to talk about Henry. So
amazing.
That's just that next layer. Finding Your Roots, that television show on PBS, was actually, I have to say that, something that I was very interested in before I was even looking. I always found my past. I didn't know a lot about my past, and he was doing the work to find out stories about the past. So I was always intrigued by that television show. And so that was the Kickstarter, I think, this one.
Wow. 3 words. What a story. It's really, really cool. Mark, if somebody's got a story, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whether it's historical or not, doesn't matter. How do they connect with you and just learn the process if they're thinking about maybe doing a book?
You can visit the website, which is nfbpublishing.com. There's a small form on the first page that starts the process.
Beautiful. Both of you, Mark, Kathy, thanks for being here today. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Really insightful, really cool, and an inspiration, I think, for all of us to kind of check into our lineage. You never know what you're going to find, and we all have a story. Appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks. We'll be right back. Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Hi, this is Terry Crews, actor, former football player, game show host, father of 5, and all-around big dude. I'm also an expert on drama. I know all kinds of drama. There's the good kind that comes with having a house full of kids. There's the bad kind like season-ending injuries. There's the necessary kind like having an agent in Hollywood. And there's silly drama like the drama around my percolating pectorals. And then there's the drama you can skip.
Skip the drama that comes with not having your high school diploma or equivalency. Find free adult education classes near you and finish your high school diploma. Visit finishyourdiploma.org.
Or text diploma to 97779. Message and data rates may apply. Reply STOP to opt out. That's diploma to 97779. And leave the drama to actors like me.
Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.